I had been attending college in Washington State for 2 full semesters before I finally decided to join a fraternity. I'm not typically a party animal or anything, but the stories I'd heard about this particular fraternity's legendary parties were enough to convince me that I had to do whatever it took to become a member. Initiation week was exactly what you'd expect from the most infamous frat on campus. They made us stay up for several nights in a row, eat raw sardines, and endure other such trials. The crowning moment of initiation, however, was that each initiate had to spend a night in the notorious Murder Forest just outside the city limits. This forest was infamous in our area for being haunted. Several victims of a serial killer had been found there, and locals frequently reported hearing eerie sounds. Still, lots of places have local legends, and I figured that the stories had been exaggerated to make our hazing experience more intense. The 6 other initiates and I were bundled into vans and driven to the edge of the forest. One of the older members told us to walk along a path for about an hour, where we'd find a campsite to spend the night. Each of us carried a backpack with a sleeping bag and tarp to lay on. After walking with the group for 45 minutes, an idea crossed my mind. The rules we were given said we had to spend the night in the forest, not that we had to sleep in a specific area. I was convinced they wanted us at that campsite so they could mess with us during the night. Determined to avoid the hassle, I decided to venture into the woods alone. Congratulating myself on my cleverness, I walked for another 15 minutes or so, lighting my way with a flashlight. Finally, I found a secluded spot with a small clearing. I set up my tarp and laid out my sleeping bag. The forest was alive with the sounds of crickets, birds, and the rustling wind. Feeling satisfied, I laid down and turned off my flashlight. The forest fell silent. I don't mean the wind lulled or the crickets paused for a moment. I mean that everything that could make a sound stopped all at once. It was so sudden and complete that I thought I had gone deaf. I rubbed my fingers together by my ears, and the soft rustling sounded out normally. I peered into the pitch darkness, but a thick layer of clouds made the night nearly impenetrable. As I fumbled for my flashlight, I felt it. A warm, humid breath spread across the back of my neck, like a person standing 6 inches behind me, exhaling slowly. It stood in stark contrast to the chilly early spring air I had felt up until then. My hand found the flashlight, and I spun it around, illuminating the clearing behind me. Nothing but grass and trees. The instant my light turned on, the sounds returned to the forest, crickets and cicadas chirping away softly. I started to stand up, ready to leave, but I stopped myself. I had to be psyching myself out. All the stories from the frat must have just been getting to my head. I couldn't explain the silence, but I resolved to stay the night. I laid back down with the flashlight still in hand and turned it off again. I half expected the forest sounds to vanish, but thankfully, the crickets and wind stayed constant. I lay in the darkness for a while, trying to calm my racing heart enough to fall asleep. After what felt like half an hour, I finally drifted off. I don't know how much time passed, but I was woken by a new sound. Rhythmic, heavy breathing, occasionally broken up by mumbling. The sound came from in front of my sleeping bag, high above me, probably some 30 feet away. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app, using the flash to light up the clearing. The picture I took revealed a figure in the trees, staring down at me. It was a woman wearing a long white dress, her long black hair covering her face. Her skin appeared worn through in places, revealing a haunting visage. She was staring directly at me. The image from the flash was burned into my mind. I kicked out of my sleeping bag and started running through the forest in my bare feet. I couldn't hear any motion behind me, but I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the forest, where I finally got cell service. Back at the fraternity, I grilled the members, but they all swore they had nothing to do with it. I had been right about them scaring the other initiates. They used air horns and blanks to terrify them while they slept, but they insisted they hadn't set up anything for me. I guess it's possible they were behind it all, but I can't see how they could have made the forest fall silent or breathed on the back of my neck without anyone else knowing where I was. And that woman, She was not something any fraternity members could have created. It remains the scariest thing I have ever seen in my life. A couple of years ago, two friends and I decided to escape to the serene wilderness of Yellow Bottom, nestled in the Cascades of Oregon, for a peaceful camping trip. Little did we know that our peaceful retreat was about to turn into an eerie experience. Around 3 a.m., I was abruptly awakened by the unmistakable sounds of a nearby campfire party. Laughter, talking, and the general hum of cheerful conversation filled the air. It wasn't scary, just incredibly annoying. We'd come to this remote spot to avoid the usual crowd of college kids, and now it seemed like they were camped less than 100 yards away. What puzzled me was the absence of any firelight or flickering flames through the tent walls. My primary concern was the potential danger of an unattended fire in the woods. Frustrated, I ground my teeth and eventually managed to drift back to sleep. An hour later, I was roused again, this time by the sound of a child's soft sniffles. The persistent, mournful crying tugged at my heart. It wasn't the intense wailing of a child in immediate danger, but the prolonged, sorrowful sobs that made me feel uneasy. I lay there, listening for about 5 minutes, wrestling with the unsettling thought of a lost child in the woods, alone and frightened. Where were the parents? What kind of trouble had befallen them? I decided to get up and investigate. Just as I was about to move, my friend, who I thought was asleep, grabbed my arm, nearly causing me to jump out of my skin. "Don't go out there. Just wait," he whispered, his voice trembling with a fear that I had never heard from him before. He knew these woods better than I did, and his palpable fear made me pause. We sat in silence, waiting, as the crying gradually ceased and the indistinct sounds of the party resumed. But now, something felt profoundly wrong. I could no longer discern the direction from which the sounds were coming. It was as if the voices and laughter were all around us, nowhere and everywhere at once. I strained my ears, trying to locate the source, wondering if the partygoers had found the crying child. But the cacophony remained directionless. The unsettling noises persisted until just before dawn, when, suddenly, they stopped. The abrupt silence was more terrifying than the noise itself, as if someone had flipped a switch. The night, once filled with laughter and sorrow, was now deathly quiet. My heart pounded in my chest, and I must have made some involuntary sound of fear. My friend, still lying down, muttered a single chilling phrase: "Stick Indians." Then he rolled over and went back to sleep. As the first light of dawn broke, I got up and brewed some coffee, hoping to shake off the lingering unease. I cautiously explored the area but didn't venture far, lacking the courage to fully investigate. There was no evidence of any other campers, no campfire, no tents, no trace of the mysterious nighttime revelers. We packed up and left that day. When I asked my friend about the Stick Indians, he refused to elaborate. Once home, I turned to Google for answers. What I found was disturbing. According to various sources, Stick Indians are a type of forest spirit in Yaquina lore, known for luring unsuspecting victims with sounds of crying babies or festive gatherings. What happens next to those who are lured away is shrouded in dark mystery. Some say the spirits consume their victims or worse. Suffice it to say, I have never returned to Yellow Bottom, and I never will. The haunting memory of that night and the fear of what might have happened remains vivid in my mind. I was at a secluded lake deep in the woods, enjoying a peaceful day of fishing with my 4-year-old child and wife. The tranquility was almost surreal, as we were the only ones there, surrounded by a dense forest of towering trees and thick underbrush. Our vehicle was parked about 50 yards away, up a hill from where we stood at the bank, with our fishing poles lazily resting in the water. The fish weren't biting, so I decided to pass the time by testing out my new camera. As I meandered around the area, my wife sat with our child, keeping an eye on the fishing poles. I wandered up the hill from the bank, pushing through the dense foliage until I emerged at the mouth of a small clearing. That's when I saw them, 4 men, approximately 20 yards away, just standing there in the woods. They looked like a bizarre mix of grunge band members and deep woods hillbillies with dirty, unkempt hair and tattered clothes. Their presence in such an isolated spot was unnerving. We were in the boondocks, far from civilization, and who knows what kind of people might lurk in such remote places. For what seemed like an eternity, they stood there, staring at me with expressions that sent a shiver down my spine. The look in one of their eyes was a chilling mix of desperation and malevolence. An eerie feeling washed over me, and I tried to play it cool, focusing my camera in a different direction. However, I couldn't shake the growing unease as I noticed one of the men had somehow moved closer to me. Why were they out here, in the middle of nowhere, with no fishing poles or hiking gear? The man who had moved closer suddenly spoke, his voice raspy and unsettling. "Hey, won't you come and take our picture?" he said, half giggling and revealing a mouth full of rotted, jagged teeth. His appearance and demeanor were deeply unsettling, and I could sense that his intentions were far from good. I forced a nervous smile, nodded, and began making my way back to my family at the fishing spot. As I walked away, I heard one of the others shout, "Hey man, come over here! We want you to take our picture!" Their laughter echoed through the trees, and I noticed they were slowly making their way toward me, talking amongst themselves in a sinister manner. I couldn't make out their words clearly, but fragments like, "Yeah, I think he's alone," and "Nah, something about his car right over that way," sent waves of fear through me. I finally made it back down to the bank, my heart pounding in my chest. I immediately told my wife to start gathering our things and head back to the car. The urgency in my voice and demeanor must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation as she quickly began packing up. We grabbed our child and hurried up the hill to our vehicle. Just as we reached the car, my wife saw what I had been fleeing from. The 4 men emerging from the woods, heading straight toward us. We threw our gear into the back, jumped into the car, and started driving out. I didn't want to alarm my wife further, but I realized there was only one way out, an old dirt road that wound through the woods and passed near where the men were. Fear clawed at me as I floored it, determined not to stop for anything. As we sped away, I caught a glimpse of one of the men in my peripheral vision, running full stride towards us, wielding what looked like an elongated tire iron. We managed to lose them in the woods just as they reached the road. About 30 minutes later, we made it to an old country concrete highway that led back to the city. Relief was short-lived as we saw another vehicle approaching, a beat-up old work truck. Panic set in as I thought, "Oh fucking shit, they caught up to us." But as the vehicle drew closer, we saw it was an elderly couple. The husband looked like an older lumberjack type, someone who could definitely handle himself. They slowed down, rolled down the window, and asked if everything was okay and if we were lost. I told them we knew how to get back to the main highway and recounted what had happened. The old man didn't seem fazed. He simply said we shouldn't be out here alone and that there had been some horrifying stories about this area. He mentioned that he never left his house without his rifle and his Vietnam military knife. We thanked them and got the hell out of there, vowing never to return. The entire drive back, my mind raced with what could have happened if we hadn't escaped in time. The peaceful day at the lake had turned into a nightmare, and the eerie feeling of being watched by those men haunted me long after we returned to the safety of our home. I'm from Australia, west of Sydney, in the breathtaking Blue Mountains area. Growing up, I lived on a sprawling 5-acre property that seamlessly blended into the adjoining national park. Behind our back fence, an expanse of untamed bushland stretched endlessly, merging with the majestic blue mountains that loomed on the horizon. One eerie night, the kind that makes the hairs on your neck stand on end, I found myself in the backyard with a torch, accompanied by my loyal border collie. This dog, usually fearless and ever ready to chase kangaroos through the bush, began whimpering and trembling with fear. His frantic attempts to get inside the house sent a shiver down my spine. It was so unlike him that it filled me with dread. With a heart pounding in my chest, I nervously shone my torch along the back fence line. To my horror, two enormous green eyes glared back at me. You know how a cat's eyes reflect light at night? These were similar but much larger and set farther apart, indicating a creature far bigger than any domestic cat. The eyes were at the height of a large dog, and there was nothing near the fence for an animal to perch on. For a few agonizing moments, those eyes just stared at me, unblinking and malevolent. Then, with the slow, deliberate movement of a predator stalking its prey, the creature began to walk along the fence line. Its eyes remained fixed on me, an unnerving gaze that seemed to pierce through the darkness, rooting me to the spot. I could feel my pulse quicken, and fear gripped me like a vice. I bolted back into the house, dragging my terrified dog with me, slamming the door shut behind us. A few days later, the tranquility of our rural community was shattered. I heard that a man down the road woke one morning to find one of his sheep brutally killed, torn to pieces in a savage attack. He assumed it was the work of wild dogs, but I had my doubts. I wasn't alone in my suspicions. Others in the area had whispered about strange sightings and eerie happenings. I was almost certain that the same creature I encountered was responsible for the gruesome attack on the sheep. I'm convinced the culprit was the legendary Blue Mountain Panther. Theories about this elusive predator abound, adding to its mystique. Some suggest it may be a descendant of big cats released by World War II US soldiers used as military mascots. Others believe it might be the progeny of big cats that escaped from traveling circuses or were sold on the black market in New South Wales during the 20th century. Over 500 sightings have been reported in the last 20 years, yet hard evidence remains elusive. I have no concrete proof of what I saw that night, but whatever it was, it's still out there, lurking in the shadows, hunting. To this day, that encounter remains the most terrifying experience of my life. The memory of those piercing green eyes haunts me, a chilling reminder of the mysteries that dwell in the dark wilderness beyond our backyard.